When the cameras first rolled at Bad Chad Customs, most viewers were immediately drawn to Chad Hiltz, his raw creativity, his rat rod rebellion, his passion for turning scrap into speed. But just behind him, a quieter force was at work, calculating, coordinating, keeping the whole operation from tipping over. Her name? Jolene MacIntyre. To the outside world, she was Chad's partner, the one who answered emails, smiled through interviews, and occasionally helped move a part or two. But that image, it barely scratched the surface. Jolene wasn't just support. She was the infrastructure, the business brain behind the brand. While Chad worked metal, Jolene worked numbers. She organized the schedule, managed the budget, negotiated supplier deals, coordinated with TV crews, and strategized brand development. Every build, every episode, every sponsorship ran through her hands. What most fans didn't see was how many hats Jolene wore. Shop manager, media liaison, brand director, therapist, crisis manager, partner. And still, she smiled. Still, she stood by Chad through the madness of reality TV fame and creative chaos. But underneath it all, something was cracking. Because being the calm in the chaos sounds poetic. Until it's your reality. Until you're the one holding it all together when everything else is on fire. Until you realize that being the glue in a storm means slowly breaking in silence. And that's exactly where Jolene found herself. At the center of a machine she helped build, slowly being consumed by the very system she kept running. The question no one asked: how long could she keep going before it all fell apart? Because before she was the symbol of strength for Bad Chad Customs, Jolene MacIntyre almost walked away. And if she had, it might have ended more than just the show. Before the show, before the fans, before the chaos, there was Jolene and Chad, working out of a small-town garage in Canning, Nova Scotia. Back then, the stakes were lower, but the dreams were just as big. Chad had the vision, the artistic madness. But Jolene? She had the clarity, the structure, the patience to take that dream and turn it into something sustainable. Jolene wasn't raised in fabrication. She didn't come from the world of car culture or custom builds. She came from academia, armed with a degree in commerce, a sharp mind for economics, and a relentless drive to do things differently. What she lacked in mechanical background, she more than made up for in insight. She wasn't intimidated by the noise or the grease or the grind. In fact, she found beauty in the mess. When Bad Chad Customs landed on television, it was Jolene who made sure the business could survive the spotlight. She took over scheduling, vendor coordination, budget tracking, and brand strategy. While Chad was sketching cars in his notebook, Jolene was meeting deadlines, negotiating production expectations, and figuring out how to make a custom car business work under the weight of global attention. But the role wasn't glamorous. Every victory on screen came with stress behind it. Every polished build featured on TV was underpinned by Jolene chasing parts, handling contracts, and calming egos, on and off camera. She became the silent architect of the Bad Chad empire. People saw her as the girl beside Chad. They missed that she was the one holding it all together. And the longer the show ran, the more invisible that pressure became. What started as a passion project soon morphed into a machine. With the success of the TV series came the expectations of producers, fans, sponsors, and even Chad himself. The builds got bigger, the timelines got shorter, and suddenly, everything was content. Every move, every mistake, every second of raw emotion was being filmed, edited, and broadcast to millions. Jolene wasn't just keeping the garage running anymore. She was managing a production set, a brand empire, and a man whose creative process thrived on spontaneity, but clashed violently with structure. Each day was a juggling act. Respond to emails by 8 a.m., make calls for parts, review invoices, prep talking points, keep the crew on schedule, handle last-minute production curveballs, then spend the evening trying to reconnect with Chad after a day of friction-fueled deadlines. And through it all, keep smiling for the camera. There were moments she'd finish a 14-hour day only to be asked, "Can you do a quick social video?" Times when her name was left off branding materials, or she was asked to smile more on set. She wasn't asking for the spotlight. She was just asking for space to breathe. But in a world driven by content, burnout isn't a red flag. It's ignored until you collapse. And Jolene was getting close. By the time Season 2 rolled around, the signs were no longer subtle. Jolene's bright energy dimmed just slightly. The spark that once powered her through marathon builds now flickered with fatigue. Behind the scenes, she was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. In quiet interviews and late-night Instagram posts, cracks in the facade began to show. She spoke candidly about exhaustion, self-doubt, and the impossible task of being everything for everyone. She wasn't asking for sympathy, just honesty. She'd started having serious conversations with herself and with those closest to her. Could she keep doing this? Could she stay in a system that never paused, that demanded constant output, but gave so little peace in return? She watched the shop grow, the brand expand, the followers increase. But inside, she was shrinking. Jolene never made a public threat to quit. That wasn't her style. But those closest to her say there was a time where walking away felt like the only way to protect her own sanity. She wasn't choosing between success and failure. She was choosing between survival and self-destruction. And if she didn't step back soon, the next choice might have been made for her. It didn't happen during some dramatic blow-up on camera. There wasn't a screaming match or a televised walkout. Instead, the moment Jolene almost left came quietly, behind the scenes, when no one was watching. The schedule had been brutal that week. Another car had to be finished in record time for a network deadline. Chad was in creative overdrive, pushing limits, chasing ideas that didn't always match the time or budget. The crew was tired. Tensions were high. And Jolene? She was running on fumes. That day, everything hit at once. A parts order delayed. A network rep calling to push for a faster turnaround. A vendor payment missed because she simply didn't have the bandwidth. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, Jolene looked around and realized no one was checking in on her. Not the producers, not the crew, not even Chad. "I felt like a machine," she would later say in a podcast interview. And even machines break. She left the shop that night without saying much, drove home in silence, sat on her porch and cried. Not because of one big thing, but because of 100 little ones that had slowly crushed her. She didn't want to quit the dream. She just didn't know if she could survive it anymore. That night, she didn't write emails. She didn't review invoices. She sat with the question, do I walk away? Burnout changes people, but it also clarifies them. For Jolene, that breaking point became something else, a line in the sand. She sat down with Chad, not as his co-star, not as his manager, but as his partner. The woman who helped build Bad Chad Customs from the ground up. And she was honest. She laid it out. The toll it had taken, the weight she carried. The fact that if something didn't change, she would have to step away. For her own health, sanity, and sense of self. To Chad's credit, he listened. It wasn't easy. Creative minds like his don't always understand structure. But he knew what Jolene had sacrificed to make the brand what it was. He knew he'd lose far more than a business manager if she walked. So they started setting boundaries. Better division of duties, more off-camera time, respect for mental space. Jolene began outsourcing some tasks, cutting back on endless 18-hour days, and saying no to obligations that drained more than they gave. And slowly, the pressure eased. Jolene didn't need to walk away to reclaim her peace. She just needed to stop giving every single piece of herself to something that didn't always give back. Jolene could have left. She could have walked away from the spotlight, from the pressure, from the expectations. She could have gone back to a quieter life, one without a camera in her face or a deadline breathing down her neck. But she stayed. Not because it was easy, but because she believed in what they were building. Jolene didn't stay for Chad. She didn't stay for the fame. She stayed because Bad Chad Customs wasn't just a business anymore. It was a platform, a place where creativity thrived, where women saw someone like themselves leading in a male-dominated industry, where young fans could see what real leadership looked like. She started using her voice more. She did interviews. She mentored younger women in trades. She opened up about burnout and work-life balance on social media, creating space for conversations that rarely happen in this industry. And fans responded. They didn't just admire Jolene for staying. They admired her for how she stayed, on her own terms, with grace, strength, and the kind of honesty that makes people rethink what leadership really looks like. She wasn't just the girlfriend anymore. She was the reason it all worked. Once Jolene set boundaries, everything began to shift. Not just for her, but for the entire shop. She wasn't just managing the business anymore. She was redefining what it meant to lead from the center. Not from ego, not from volume, but from clarity. The crew responded differently. Producers adapted. Even Chad began working within a more stable rhythm, and fans noticed. Suddenly, the woman who once stood quietly behind the builds was front and center in a new way. Not louder, not showier, but more grounded, more intentional. Interviews became more frequent. Her Instagram grew not because of staged photos, but because of raw honesty. She began opening up about burnout, about self-worth, about the emotional toll of carrying too much for too long. She spoke directly to women in the trades, to people in small towns with big dreams who didn't see themselves in the usual TV narratives. Jolene was no longer the girl who stuck around. She became the architect of her own presence. And in doing so, she reshaped the DNA of Bad Chad Customs. Because it was never just about cars. It was about building a business, a brand, and a life on your own terms, even when the world is asking you to be someone else. In a genre dominated by loud personalities and staged tension, Jolene became something rare. A woman who led quietly, but unmistakably. She wasn't barking orders. She wasn't smashing things for shock value. She wasn't pretending to know everything. She was simply showing up every day, making hard decisions, solving real problems, and supporting a creative genius without sacrificing herself in the process. And for a generation of viewers, especially young women watching car shows that too often turned women into props or sidekicks, that meant everything. Jolene became a symbol not just of perseverance, but of balance, of doing brilliant work without burning out, of succeeding in a male-dominated industry without becoming hardened by it. In an industry full of flash, she proved that substance wins. And in every fan letter, every DM, every thank you from someone who felt seen because of her, Jolene saw her reason to stay. Not for the fame, not for the brand, but because people needed to see what was possible when you refused to break and choose to build. Jolene MacIntyre never planned to be famous. She didn't grow up dreaming of television or magazine features. She didn't expect to become a leader in custom car culture. But life has a way of calling people into roles they're uniquely built for. "And Jolene?" she answered. "Today, Bad Chad Customs continues to thrive. The builds are still bold. Chad is still pushing creative limits. But now, there's a quiet steadiness in the foundation. And it's because Jolene is stronger than ever. She's not just in the shop. She is the shop, the negotiator, the strategist, the steady hand behind every move the brand makes. And while fans still marvel at Chad's artistry, they've come to understand it wouldn't work without her. She's a living reminder that you don't need to shout to lead, that you can step back to step forward, that walking away isn't weakness, but sometimes the greatest power is knowing when not to. Jolene stayed, but not by accident. She stayed with intention, with courage, and with a vision bigger than any one build. Because, in the end, she wasn't just part of Bad Chad's story. She was the reason it could keep being told.